Will democracy survive the next couple of years?
Access to Democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, The Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center and Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Truestone Financial, with locations in Minnesota and Wisconsin, has proudly served its members since 1939. Truestone engages, educates, and supports its members to ensure they have the tools to empower their financial well-being. Truestone Financial, your neighborhood credit union. Learn more at truestone.org. Edina Eye Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years now, in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services and dedicated specialists committed to excellence, with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Access to Democracy. I am your guest host, Mike Supina, and today I will be chatting with someone whom I consider to be one of the most fascinating people in Eagan, Jerri Neddermeyer. Jerri is an artist, a potter, a writer, a poet, a musician, a teacher, an entrepreneur, and a co-founder of Eagan's newest arts nonprofit, Artworks. Welcome, Jerri Neddermeyer.
Thanks a bunch, Mike. I really appreciate it. And thanks for having the opportunity for us to sit together and talk about local stuff and art stuff and just life in general. It's a great opportunity to sit.
For sure. And Jerri, you heard me rattle off that litany of your many talents, and we can easily fill our allotted time with talking about just one of them. But what I'm going to do is to ask you about just a few and kind of let you riff off from there. And I'm going to begin with musician. Tell us about what instruments you play. How did you decide to study music, and what are you doing with music now, if anything?
Yep, I'm a classically trained musician. So I went through school at the U of M for music education. And when I started applying for colleges, I actually did a flip the coin thing where I knew I wanted to teach, but I wasn't sure what I wanted to teach. And so one side of the coin was music, and one side of the coin was physics. And so I flipped the coin, and the gods were in my favor, because I do not think I would have really enjoyed being amongst other physicists in my everyday life. I much prefer being around creatives all day, every day.
Well, as an almost physicist, you might remember Einstein famously said, God doesn't play dice with the universe, but I guess Jerri plays flipping coins with the universe, or at least with her career.
Yeah.
I can't speak for physics, but I think the world of music is glad it turned out the way it did. And I know you play the oboe, because I actually have an oboe player in my family, and I know a few of them around here. And Eagan seems to be an oboe stronghold in the South Metro. So awesome that you play. And I also know your 2 kids are very talented musicians as well. Like many people in Eagan, I know you as a potter. And in fact, you were my pottery teacher at the Eagan Art House for several sessions. And of course, as a professional potter, you sell your pottery at art fairs. Pottery is an art, but for you, it's a business. And how does an artist reconcile art as an expression of their creative spirit with art as a marketable product?
So I started doing pottery in roughly 2005, and it was just a way to kind of get out of the house and do something that didn't require me to manage students, because at the time I was teaching band, and or manage parents, do any of that. So I could sit down at a wheel and a lump of clay and just do something that was for me. What I ended up figuring out was that it's like any other craft or any other skill. If you put in the time and put in the intention, that there's a threshold that you sort of cross of having enough skill to sort of create what your brain can imagine. And to be able to do that sort of consistently. So I practice a bunch because I'm a practicer. I'm one that really likes seeing progress. So whenever I work in clay, I know that if I put in the time and if I spend a huge chunk of time only making bottles, that it'll make my bottles better. Or if I spend a huge chunk of time saying, I don't really like the way my pitchers look or the way my pitchers pour, if I really work on pitchers for a chunk of time, that will improve my consistency and my fluidity in that form. When you start talking about art as a business, there's this thought process that and there's a joke that potters have, actually, that if you don't like a piece, you just glaze it blue and someone will buy it. And nothing that I make is blue now. But what I really find, I know, right? Nice shirt. What I find is that I prefer to make what sets me on fire, because then I can talk to people about the product. And I can talk to people about the process. And if people relate to those things, then they'll purchase the product. And if you think of it as purchasing a product, specifically, there are people who will purchase a cup or purchase a pitcher or purchase a plate. But there is also a group of people who will purchase a thing that is like purchasing stock in an artist. They like the connection that they had with the artist when they're talking about the work. They like the information they got about how it was made. They like the kind of energy that the person has kind of imbued the object with, and they take that away. I can remember myself. I went to a pottery sale and I loved this teapot. It was so beautiful, and the way the little lip hung in, and when I tilted it, it didn't fall off. And I was like, "This is beautiful." And I asked the artist about it. He was crabby, and I'm like, "I'm not buying your teapot because I cannot drink tea out of this cranky pot now. I can't do it."
It's going to remind you. It's going to remind you of the bad experience. That's funny. You said a couple things there that I'm trying to remember them all in my head for follow-ups. One was, you said you're a practicer. So, and I'm starting to see a theme here, because we talked about music already. And I think a lot of people, even if people who aren't musicians, know that musicians need to practice, continue. I mean, they practice probably 10 or 50 or 100 times more than they actually perform, right?
Correct.
Potters evidently do the same, from what I'm hearing from you. And it sounds like probably in any other art that you're working on, you're practicing a lot as well. For example, I'm looking at the two pieces right behind you that I know you did. This is a show that's in Artworks right now, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But and I did ask you about those when I saw them at the exhibit, and you said that same thing, that you just practice and practice, drawing from photographs that you find online until you really got good at it before you start drawing people that you know and doing missions and things like that. So it sounds like, back to the art as a business, I mean, the practice sort of tells the story there, because if you're just doing it, to goof off, and, maybe you're not going to practice at all, but if you're doing it as a business, you have to be good at it. Otherwise, no one's going to. You
have to be good, and you have to be consistently good.
Yes.
Not just good, occasionally, right? Like you know from pottery that like happenstance will sometimes you sit down and you're like, "Ooh, look at this beautiful mug. I made this beautiful mug." And then you can't do diddly for the next,
Yes.
3 months, right? And
that sounds very familiar.
Yes. So it's the same thing where I draw and I'm like, or I paint or I do something and I'm like, "Oh, I'm so irritated because eyes just don't look right or hands just don't look right." Well, okay, I need to draw 1,000 eyeballs.
Now, you said another thing early on in that last part when we were talking about teaching, and you said something about handling kids, and then you kind of threw in almost parenthetically, or managing, I think the term, managing parents. And I'm like, okay, wait a second here. I mean, you don't need to get too far into that if you don't want to, but I'd be curious to know which is the bigger challenge when you're teaching as far as kids or parents.
I think it depends. I loved teaching. I loved working with kids. I loved the relationships that I built with kids. When you teach band, you're often the same in front of the same student from at least 4 years in high school, and sometimes I had students who I also had in middle school. So I had a student for 4 years or 7 years, depending on when they came through the program. And so watching a kid grow like that is a really positive thing, and a really rewarding experience. Parents are also fantastic in a lot of ways. But as a parent, I know that I have very radial focus when it comes to my kid and the way I see my kid. And that's a pretty typical experience for parents, and they should always be rabidly in their own kid's court. And so sometimes that rabid feeling blinds you to a bigger picture about balancing your kid with the needs of maybe 300 other band kids. And so that could often be a challenge, is taking the needs of each individual student and where they're at and blending it with 300 other people all at the same time. And then also their parents' ideas for what their kid should be and is.
Right. Well, and yeah, and especially since you're seeing it, you've seen it from the band teacher's point of view and the band parents' point of view, and probably even a band student's point of view. So you've kind of you've probably been in all three of those situations. So yeah, I could see what you mean. And I'm not a musician, but I could imagine having a bunch of kids. I don't remember if you saw it, was it middle school or high school? Both, and having a bunch of kids show up with their trumpets and whatever they have, and they're not very good. And then at the end of the year, you're like, hey, they're okay now. Yes. I can imagine there's a pretty big sense of accomplishment that comes.
Yes, there is.
That. Wonderful. I'm going to ask you a little bit about, and this sounds vague, but I have a few examples about artistic process. So, for example, have you ever envisioned a piece that you wanted to make, but you realized that you needed to learn a new skill in order to do it? So you had the idea in your head and you knew what you wanted to do, but you're like, wait, I don't know how to do whatever, woodworking or macrame or the laser cutter, or not the laser, you know what I mean, the router.
CNC machine downstairs.
Thank you. So how has that, do you intentionally envision something that you don't know how to do yet? Or is it just kind of like, okay, I have an idea, now I got to learn the skills and get good enough at them in order to make this thing?
Yeah, I think my imagination is pretty wild, and I go off on a wild hair fairly frequently, and I don't think it's disorganized, and I don't think it's, but I also don't think it's intentional. My mind goes where it goes. It goes where it's meant to go. And I can fight that, or I can lean into it, depending. I very often have an idea for something without any idea how I'm going to pull it off. And I do often have to learn new skills in order to make that work. And sometimes I find myself doing something now that I sort of envisioned a decade ago, but didn't really see it in the same way as I do now because my skills have caught up. Pottery is like that all the time, where I think, oh gosh, I'd really like to be able to carve this and make a whole set of things that are related by this kind of surface design thematically. But how do I reproduce it? How do I reproduce this surface design on different forms? It may be a surface design that's really applicable to a flat platter that's slab built, but not to a thrown pitcher form that isn't a cylinder and you can't wrap a piece of paper around it and do a monoprint. Sure. So figuring out ways to adapt to make a related set of materials is something I end up having to do. And I do a lot of work where I'm compelled to start a project, but I don't totally know what the final product is going to be yet. That I start on the process and I allow myself that play without judging the quality of whatever it is that I'm doing. And I allow myself a lot of art play. And I think that that is really key to my personal development, that if I spend a lot of time judging how good the stuff is that comes out, I will not make anything.
It's funny that you say that, because I do find that I don't create nearly as much as you do, but when I do find that it's better that I don't have too specific an idea in the beginning of what I want. First of all, because things might go south and it's like, okay, time to go to plan B, or just because as I'm working on it, I'm like, hey, you know what? I like this a little better, you know. This is in fact something I'm working on right now, that after this interview, I'm going to be going downstairs to the makerspace downstairs and working on a little bit more. So cool. Interesting that you said that. And that also gets back to the whole practice thing again. You know, it's like you have a technique and maybe you haven't used it before and you're, I have to adapt this to a curved form, and I better go practice on something or make tiles, if you know, whatever it is.
And I'd like to see in the next set of things, I haven't spent as much time in clay clay is my primary medium, and I haven't spent that much time in clay in about a year. And some of that's based on COVID and some of that's based on just where I'm at mentally. But I've spent a lot of time drawing, and I've spent a lot of time painting, and I've spent a lot of time on this kind of printing process. And transferring image process. And I really think that when I get back into clay, my clay is going to look completely different, because I've spent so much time on surface design that just wasn't clay. And I'm interested to see how that translates. Like, can I take some of these portraiture things and transfer them onto clay in a way? Or can I take some of my butterfly imagery and reproduce that on clay surface? And can I, will I end up wanting to do something sculptural with that butterfly form, building off of some of these paper things that I've made? And I think it really could be anything. I can't see it in clay yet. But as soon as I start playing in clay, I'll be able to see it.
For sure. One more question I want to ask you about art as a business, and then I'm going to jump into artworks and ask you a little bit about that. But the last question about art as business, something that we talked about a little bit, and even when I was on the board here at Artworks, we talked about as a board a little bit, and that is about the what I'd call unfortunate trend of in the art world of devaluing the work of artists. So and I guess that's all the intro I'll do, because this is a topic that you're far more familiar with than I am. So I'm curious to hear what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, I think this is a really big topic. I think we look at the arts and arts access, and it's a set of buzzwords that gets used a lot, especially when you're applying for grant funding, or if you're working in public art or anything like that. They talk about, what kind of access are you providing to the arts, either for your community or for your neighbors, or these beautiful sculptures that are being put all around our city and other cities near us, and art benches and things like that are really beautiful. And I think the takeaway for me that I never realized when I was an art consumer and not an art maker was that art is never free. Nothing is, actually. Nothing is free at all. Somebody pays for it. So if I go out to that beautiful butterfly sculpture that is out near the art house, that was put in by public art funds allocated by the city of Eagan. So we're able to go and enjoy that piece of art because somebody paid for it, and that access is free, but it costs somebody something. And if I had to bet money, I would bet that the artist was compensated, yes, but maybe not in direct proportion to what it actually cost him in time to develop the skills to be able to make a thing, as well as in the materials itself. It's super common for me to be approached to say, would you like to, do you have anything that you can donate for a fundraiser? And, I usually say, yes, absolutely. There's something that I can donate for a fundraiser. But to realize that it isn't a free thing. Nothing is free. That the thing that I create, it might take me 10 minutes to throw it, and it might take me another 10 minutes to trim it, and then it might take me another 10 minutes to do surface design on it, and it might take me another 10 minutes to load it and unload it. So I've spent like an hour on this one piece, but I've also spent a decade getting to the capability of being able to make that piece in the first place.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's
so
what goes into it to get you there. And I have a confession to make. I'll plead guilty because I'm one of those people that went to you at one point, I think about maybe 4 years ago, and asked you what a piece you could contribute for a fundraiser.
Absolutely.
Oh well. But now I get it. Of course. For me to put something together for the fundraiser would take a lot longer than 10 minutes times 5. But regardless, for you, it's an entire career's worth of preparation to get to the point where you can make a piece like that. And people don't always realize that when they just think of a piece of art and be like, oh, how long did it take you to do that? The answer isn't an hour. The answer is my whole life.
Right. Absolutely. And then you see a piece of work, for example, get bid on and maybe go for undervalue. I think, well, I could have taken that picture and I could have sold it myself and donated the full value to that organization, instead of making a piece, giving it to them, having them train an audience that it's worth whatever this low bid is. Somebody feels super great about it. And the organization gets less money, and the culture says, that's only worth X.
Yeah, and even when you say culture, and even that, the work of artists is undervalued in one sense, like we were just talking about, in a strictly business retail, sense, and in another sense, it's undervalued in a much more big cultural sense, where art is considered kind of an add-on. It's like, well, we do all this other stuff, and if we have anything left over, sure, it'd be nice to have a little bit of art too. Well, this is maybe a good segue into talking about artworks, because of course, when any new arts organization opens up anywhere, there's always going to be a certain amount of that attitude that accompanies it, saying, well, do we really need this? And as I think has been proven over the last 5 years, yeah, we really did. I'm going to give a quick little intro about artworks and then kind of throw it over to you, because you're the expert. Obviously you're renowned locally as a potter, but you were one of the co-founders of Artworks, which began in January of 2016. And I met you shortly after that time, the nonprofit started in 2016, and it started from nothing. It wasn't, oh, well, we had a little organization, or there was a bunch of people, or there was a community group. There was zero, and you and the other co-founders literally came together and said, this is something that's missing in Egan, and we need it, and how do we make it happen? Right now, it occupies a prominent building right here in the middle of Egan, the heart of Egan. It's filled with beautiful art and creative people. And I guess my question for you is, how did that happen? How did we get there?
Well, and it actually doesn't start from nothing. It starts from, 2 decades of work by the people who have run the art festival and the people who have run the Egan Art House. It starts with, 2 decades of work of people talking about what needs to happen next in the community, and building a culture for expansion of that. So when Egan Forward came around, and Egan was asked, what is it that you want out of your community in the future, in the next 20 years, arts and creative spaces and places for people to be involved with each other in that way was high on that list. And, again, we weren't nothing. We were a group of artists who hung out with each other and talked a lot about, gosh, I wish we had gallery space, or gosh, I wish we had a place to work, or gosh, I wish we had a place where we would show up and work with other artists across medium. And so it starts that way, right? It starts with a group of people saying, hey, why can't we? And then it's like anything else. You start identifying skill sets that you need to find in order to make whatever you can imagine in your head come out. So for artworks, we had the idea of this gallery space that would be always have pieces of art up and places for people to work, and maker space and a small performance venue. But the skill sets that we didn't have at the start was, oh my goodness, how do we learn about real estate law and nonprofit law and budget and finance projections for businesses? How do we learn about fundraising? How do we build relationships with 150 million people? How do we, not 150 million, right?
Yes.
But if there was a chunk of time where I talked to everyone in a doorknob about the organization, and now it's really successful.
And a few of those people that you spoke to actually became very big benefactors of artworks.
Correct.
I know
Absolutely.
the Egan Noon Rotary Club, whose name is on the windows, has been a big benefactor, and I know there's some others as well, which is wonderful to know that there's people in this community that are willing to support something like this. I could ask you a lot more about artworks, but I'm afraid we're running out of time, and I want to get to one more thing, which is I want you to tell me about mudança. And that's a word I love to say, even though I don't speak that language. So tell me what that is.
Mudança is a Portuguese word, and it means change. And basically, it's a project or a journey that I'm on as an artist, and it's basically a collection of all of my writing, all of my media, all of my clay, all of my everything, my approach to creativity. And I think there's a place to really look at artists and their process, and a way to support art and their process, the process of making art, not just by me, but by everyone else in the community as well. So I have all of my writing there, lots of painting there, and an opportunity to be involved in supporting the art community through my Patreon.
Wonderful. And I know that we're kind of running short on time, so I am just going to say that thank you so much, Jerri. I'm going to give you one last moment to do a sign off, but thanks so much for visiting with us. And I want to also thank Alan Miller for inviting me to host this segment of the show, which very generous of him, and of course our tech crew. And I want everybody to be safe, take care, get your vaccine if you don't have it yet. And Jerri, do you have any closing remarks for us?
No, I want to invite y'all to be involved in the arts in your community here and everywhere you can possibly be. Find an artist and make friends with them, and buy their work. Support
and Artworks is open every Tuesday from
10 to 6. We have a really beautiful supporter show up right now. There's about 114 pieces of work. Come and check it out.
Supporter show is one of my favorites. Thanks so much, Jerri.
Thanks
everybody.
A bunch, Mike.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.